So as we look at this part, try to keep in mind the prior part about how diverse and universal this can be across the planet. So with our community now, we are dealing with this problem, and we can start with biology, because humans at tropical latitudes produce more females. So we are going to have a lower sex ratio anyway, just as Black human beings, because Black women produce fewer boys. So the gender ratio for Black people, it's like for every 100 girls, there's 1 or 2 or 1 or 3 boys born. But for whites and Asians, it's for every 100 girls, it's 105 or 106 for whites. So you start off with a little lower gender ratio. Now, that's not a problem. It's when some other things in the ecology can come along and start knocking off the males in that society. And then you start really getting these bad ratios. So historically, if we're looking at Black America now, they've had the lowest gender ratio of any major US ethnic group for over 150 years. Now, of course, the environments they were living in would have been the men a bit more, enslavement and Jim Crow, and men don't have immune systems that are as good as women's immune systems. More boys are going to die than girls. Testosterone suppresses the immune system, and males have more. So with a weakened immune system, disease can knock off males. This is all males now, not just Black males. It knocks them off more than it does with women. Women survive better. But if we look at this study here, that's 80 years old, they were already looking at sex ratio problems causing family structure issues in the 1920s and 1930s, and this study is published in 1940. But also we have what we talked about a couple of weeks ago in terms of the near group selection. So I use Jim Crow as an example of cultural constructs that want to hold certain groups down and then push other groups up. If you look at number 1, the weak economic position of Black males will be how that society was targeting Black males and restricting their socioeconomic status. So between having a lower gender ratio, poorer health outcomes, and then restricting Black male status, at least this researcher felt that was part of the reason for more Black families headed by females. Now, if we look at some UK statistics, if you look right there in the middle of that Black category, you see Black African, Black Caribbean, and then you look at the male column and the female column, you'll see that the lowest sex ratios are amongst the Black African, and the lowest one is Black Caribbean. So you see 47 to 53. So it's slightly lower for these two groups. So 47 and 48 men to 53 or 52 women. But that ratio gets worse because now you have to think about what is the quality of those men? What's their educational attainment? Do they have clean criminal records? What about the employment or underemployment? So in what ways has their status been restricted? Because if we think again about how females make their choices, we need men who are doing well in those areas to lift up their quality a little bit. That makes them then more attractive to a female to make something with, because it's difficult to make something with a man who doesn't have much going on for himself. So now with Black Caribbean men, well, I guess to a certain extent with African men as well, but I haven't seen recent stats on the Black African community, but I know it wasn't as extreme as this. So we've got the interracial issue here with over 50% of Black Caribbean men cohabitating with non-Black partners. Now it's pretty high amongst Black Caribbean women too. So, 40% are with non-Black men, but you've still got a 15% differential there. So that adds to a low sex ratio. And also there's a quality issue there, but I haven't been able to really find good information on that, as in, are the men who are dating interracially, are these the men less likely to be criminalized, are more highly educated? Because then that would mean that the Black Caribbean women are getting a lower quality of male from their community. Now, I can't say one way or another where that is. I suspect that might be an issue, but I don't have the empirical evidence for that, but just by understanding the behavior pattern, let's say things we looked at in the colorism lecture and the neo-group selection lecture, my expectation for this research, if it was done, would be that the non-Black women are getting a higher quality of Black Caribbean man compared to the Black Caribbean women. I think they would, but I don't know. So we can discuss that. Now, if we flip to America and look at their sex ratio for the Black community, it's catastrophic. I mean, if you look at just the pure number, so we're looking at 80-something Black men for every 100 Black women as an adult. But you can't go off that number. Well, that's poor, but you can't go off that number. The white sex ratio is 97 men for every 100 white women. So if you remember how I started out the lecture with group A and group B, as in group A having a balanced sex ratio and group B having a very poor unbalanced sex ratio, you can see what's going on there with whites having a balanced sex ratio and African Americans having a poor one already, and it's going to get worse when I show you the rest of these statistics. I mean, if we look at the last sentence, the imbalance was greatest in 380 neighborhoods where there were fewer than 2 adult Black men for every 3 adult Black women under the age of 65. Now, if we look at this scatter plot graph over here, so if you look at that 100% line there, you'll see most of those dots are below the line, and there's only, well, a lot less above the line. Now, what's tragic about this graph is those dots above the line represent areas where Black men are the majority, where they outnumber women. But as you can see here, they're heavily concentrated in relatively few places, and those tend to be prisons. So those dots above that 100% are basically where Black men are in prison, where they outnumber the Black women in the area. But as you can see, the vast majority of those plots, they're below 100%. I mean, let's look at between 60 and 80%. Look at how many of those areas where, you know, there's just so much more Black women present and a lot less Black men. Now, using information from the 2010 census, the New York Times published an article here that there were 1.5 million Black men missing from the Black population in America. And there were 3 big areas that was gobbling up these men: homicide, disease, and racial mass incarceration took out the lion's share of these Black men out of circulation. So I already talked about disease and that testosterone suppresses the immune system. So Black men are going to be more likely, you know, to die from a disease, or Black boys as well. So by the time we're getting into adulthood, there are already less Black males around than Black females, even though at birth it's 102, 103 Black boys per Black girl, or 100 Black girls. By the time they get to adulthood, there's already, it's down to like, you know, 90 Black males for every 100 Black women. And this brings us to the research we looked at a couple of weeks ago, because with all these men out of the population, now we're talking about male guidance and Black boys being less able to escape from poverty because male guidance isn't in their life, even to the point where it doesn't necessarily have to have a man in the home. If you have lots of Black men in the neighborhood, there's still a positive effect on Black boys being able to escape poverty if there's male guidance just in the neighborhood. So that could be grandfathers, uncles, you know, nice, good models of Black males who live across the street or next door neighbors, having an impact on those Black boys who may not actually have a Black male at home. But when you just warehouse these men and empty these neighborhoods of Black males, you have this problem, because without that male guidance, statistically, we see over and over again, they struggle to escape poverty, more likely to get in trouble with the law or engage in violent confrontations with other young Black men, and a heightened probability of failing in education, and they make less money as adults in the employment sector. And of course, this is going to trickle down to affect the women and affect the children, because now you have more unstable men who are less accomplished and have a lower status in that society. I don't know how many of you were here for the Neo group selection video. I don't know when Nigel will put that up on the site, but so this fits in with what we're looking at here on how the society is choosing against Black people and particularly going after the men, and then it trickles down to the entire community. Now, Ralph Richard Banks, he's, I think, a legal scholar who teaches at Stanford, and he's actually married to the great Black social psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt, and we looked at her research in several prior lectures. She wrote the book called Biased. He wrote this book about 10 years ago about how the low sex ratio is affecting the African-American community. So it's part of the reason so many Black women are unmarried, and he goes through the issues around why it's there in terms of mass incarceration and homicide. And I found his solution kind of interesting, because his solution was, if more Black women marry interracially, then that will bring some balance to the sex ratio, because some women will just want a Black man, but then if a good chunk of them choose a man who is not Black, then it will bring more balance to the Black male-female ratio. But even though he wrote so much about what's actually causing the sex ratio problem, as in the homicide and the mass incarceration, I mean, why wouldn't you want to say, okay, how do we reduce the homicide and the mass incarceration? I didn't really see that in his book, and I read it cover to cover. So if I missed it, apologize, but I didn't see it. But this is his solution. Now, from a scientific point of view, his solution could work. So if a higher percentage of Black females in America were marrying interracially, it would bring some balance to the sex ratio. And that probably would assist remove some of these bad outcomes that we're seeing, because then the sexual behavior strategies are going to change. It would reduce the dyadic power that males have. Women wouldn't have to, Black women, I should say, wouldn't have to put up with a lot of the rubbish they're getting from Black men. Black men wouldn't be in that power position. So once you bring balance to it, a lot of the more positive behaviors come back, because that dyadic power has been removed. So, you know, from a purely scientific point of view, what he says would work, but I do have problems with not saying, okay, we're just going to leave the homicide and the mass incarceration alone, because from an evolutionary perspective now, let's say they do that and the Black community starts improving, performing much better, like we saw with Chinese Americans. Do you really think they're just going to allow that, this improved performance by the Black community? Remember, we are status conscious, not just individually, but as groups. And when the Black community improves, steps tend to be taken to restrict that improvement, even if we're just talking about unconsciously how people behave towards the Black community. So the example I used was when Jim Crow was torn down. A decade later, now you had the mass incarceration coming in to now reassert that control over the Black community, because with Jim Crow coming down and laws improving some aspects socially for Black people, with them making that improvement, now there's concern about the improvement they're making. So you bring in a new strategy to dominate that population. That would be a problem here, because if they start marrying interracially, Black community improves, people will start to notice their status catching up to theirs, and they will want to do something about that. That is an aspect of human nature. We always form these group-based hierarchies, and when you're higher up in the hierarchy and the group behind you starts getting closer to you, strategies start to change to do something to keep that gap between you. You want to stay on top, stay number one, stay dominant. So this wouldn't be a permanent solution in my view. And if you've been here for the whole lecture series this year and last year, then you'd absolutely know why this wouldn't be a permanent solution. But looking at it just specifically, what he's saying could work. Now, young Black urban men are more likely than whites to be in these categories here, which makes them poor choices, or at least an unstable choice for a Black woman to form a family with. So unemployed, imprisoned, institutionalized, addicted, you know, that they're just not going to be what you can think you're going to make a good family with if they have this unstable or these problems in their lives. Now, these guys are the guys they want. These are the black guys who they've avoided criminalization. They don't have those problems. They're educated, they got good jobs, they're doing really well for themselves. And, you know, at least here in Darity and colleagues, his studies, a lot of research actually calls them the marriageable male. So the marriageable black male is the educated guy, not criminalized, in full-time employment, can take care of himself and someone else. So that tends to make him now attractive to a woman, in that this is someone I can build something with. I'm bringing something to the table and he brings something to the table too, because black women are doing so well educationally and so forth. They're gonna want a partner who can match them. And this is the guy who can match them. But these guys are a problem because they're hot, right? Look at the sex ratio of marriageable black males to black females. 46 to 100 was put out here in Darity and colleagues, his studies in 2009. So when I said, you know, we don't really just want to go by that 88 to 100 sex ratio, because a lot of those men in the 88 to 100 category, they're here. They're in long-term unemployment, imprisoned, addicted, and so on. These are men, women are going to, they're not going to, women are not going to be choosing men like this, or at least they prefer not to. These are the guys they want. And these guys know that. And so they've got this dyadic power going on. So they're going to be less likely to get married early because they've got all these female options. They're attractive because of what they've done, what they've been able to avoid. So they are more likely to follow that short-term sexual strategy that I've been talking about. That's really not a good deal for a woman. But when there's the plentiful female options around, these guys know they're attractive and they play it up. And this brings us to, you know, our gender wars issue. So we've got a lot of this going on over social media, and these guys play a big role in why that gender war is there.